The 80s was a decade of change, with new opportunities, new trends, and more. Life was peaceful, life was flourishing. New hairstyles to new fashion and new video games. The decade was a turning point in many people's lives. But with innovation and equality also came bad things. One horrible thing changed America up to this day.
This is why ACT UP is the most important activist group for AIDS, and one of the most critical groups to the LGBTQ community to this day.
Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome, or AIDS. AIDS swept through the nation, infecting whoever it could, to lovers, drug addicts, or even children. An epidemic was on everyone's hands and barely anyone knew what to do. By 1987, 562,000 people were living with AIDS in the US. This angered millions of people around America, but not many people knew what to do about this epidemic. Yet someone was able to light the fuse that started years and years of protests. Larry Kramer was born in Connecticut to 2 Jewish parents. He was considered an unwanted child by his family. When he moved to Maryland in high school, he was able to discover who he was and his sexuality.
In 1987, the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, aka ACT UP, was founded by Larry Kramer, which was a direct protest to the government and agencies not giving treatment to people who have AIDS. Larry Kramer giving the speech, How to Survive a Plague, ignited anger in millions.
Plague! We are in the middle of a plague, and you behave like this. Plague! 40 million infected people is a plague.
Larry Kramer might have founded ACT UP and began the wave of protests throughout the country, but ACT UP as a whole changed the way we see the LGBT community to this day. About 200,000 people from the LGBTQ community came to do the March of Washington in 1987. They came together to protest for more money for treatment and research on AIDS, and also an end to discrimination against homosexuals. The U.S. Park Police reported that about 50,000 people showed up at 1 p.m. Then at 5:30, about 200,000 people have joined together for a rally. The police also reported that it took the whole afternoon to count all the people that were there. Later on, organizers even said that about 300,000 people joined the rally in front of the White House. The people wanted to say that gays are a united force and that they shouldn't be discriminated for what they are, and they deserve the health care they need.
In the late 80s, the AIDS epidemic started to endanger thousands of lives, including all of New York's LGBTQ community. The rate of death and infections were rising at an alarming speed, but unfortunately, the government didn't take any action to try to help cure or even treat the disease. There was hardly any talk about what to do about it. So the activist group ACT UP created its motto, Silence equals death. A very on-the-nose policy telling the public that indifference and silence will make the disease or deaths go away. One of the biggest battles that the ACT UP organization would face was Burroughs Wellcome. The company held the most approved AIDS treatments, but they were outrageously overpriced. Very few could afford it. Then at September 14th, 1989, ACT UP began a rally at the New York Exchange with about 350 people to fight for the lowering of prices for treatment. But earlier that afternoon, some spokesmen with photographers of ACT UP went to Burroughs Wellcome and took pictures of the high prices that would later circulate around the public eye and result in the price drop for the treatment.
Another significant event was the Stop the Church protest on the Catholic Church's deadly homophobic and misogynistic policies on December 10th, 1989.
This is Jesus Christ. I'm in front of St. Patrick's Cathedral on Sunday. We're here reporting on a major AIDS activist and abortion rights activist demonstration, which will be taking place here all morning. Inside, Cardinal O'Connor is busy spreading his lies and rumors about the position of lesbians and gays. We're here to say we want to go to heaven too.
4,500 people gathered outside St. Patrick's Catholic Church. They started at 10:15 a.m. to protest against John O'Connor's recent statements that were about abortion, homosexuality, and AIDS. Some people would tie themselves to the pews inside the church, while others would lay down in the aisles or start shouting.
Prayers won't save the 1 to 1.5 million people infected by human immunodeficiency virus. We're not going to take it anymore. You're killing us. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it.
Also, about a dozen protesters blocked Fifth Avenue, causing traffic by laying on the streets. Other protesters were laying in the aisles and were carried out on stretchers. The police reported about 111 people were arrested in total. O'Connor said that he found it ironic that he's being accused of doing nothing, but he's always donating money to an AIDS care and research company. And he also said that they're devoting 10 to 12% of their beds to people with AIDS. Later on, about 400 policemen gather near Fifth Avenue and were greeted by protesters with signs that all talk about something with safe sex. Mayor Edwards said at one point that if they do not like the church, then they can find or make one for themselves. Then on another day, some protesters marched downtown against the church and going to an abandoned school with other homeless people. Later, police reported that they arrested 3 people, which resulted in an organization to call a revolution for the homeless that tried to move into.
In 1990, the National Institute of Health put out a definition of AIDS that was favored towards men. While many were happy that AIDS was recognized, many were still angry that women were left out of the equation. On top of this, the prices of the most effective AIDS medication at the time, AZT, was too expensive, and many were dying without being able to afford it. ACT UP organized a protest on the NIH campus, which roughly 1,000 people attended. Many made gravestone-shaped signs and laid down, showing their anger at the organization for letting that many people died when they had a treatment. In 1990, George H.W. Bush started a war in Saudi Arabia that has been later dubbed the Gulf War. This angered many activists, as he said that there was not enough money to spend on AIDS research, but he then proceeded to start an expensive war. Needless to say, this angered those involved in ACT UP as well. They organized a protest on the 22nd and 23rd of January, 1991. They came with signs and slogans. They said things like, "Fight AIDS, not Arabs," and "Money for AIDS, not war." Some even brought balloons with these sayings written on.
The prompt of this year's National History Day was breaking barriers, and the ACT UP group epitomizes breaking social barriers, especially those in the LGBTQ community. At first, they had a dozen of layers of red tape to go around. Not only were they constantly heard for the way that they exist, but they also were completely ignored by the government. No action was taken as it was seen as a fringe or a gay man's disease. Even so, this group dragged the public's eyes to show the suffering of those affected by AIDS. They knew what they had to do and did anything in their power to get there. They needed to break through so many barriers of red tape and bigotry, and they somehow got enough attention to make a difference. This is why ACT UP is one of the most important examples to the LGBTQ communities to this day, and has changed America for the better.